good evening from Wolfville. It'll be a little earlier in the day for our speaker this evening. From Wolfville and Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We take a moment at the beginning of our events to offer a land acknowledgement, and I always try to give a little bit of context around why we do that. And I was thinking about this evening's event and thinking about the connection to draw. And what I'd like to refer to a little bit and just take a moment or two of everyone's time to just say that for many of us, and again, Ron and I were just talking about the weather, for many of us in this part of Nova Scotia, we're seeing signs of spring. And we often talk about spring being a time of renewal and hope and prosperity and a time to start again, to sort of dust off the cobwebs from the winter and think about sort of moving forward. And when we have these types of events, these virtual events in particular, I always hope that folks walk away with a new learning or a new awareness or perhaps a call to action. And you walk away thinking, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do something different or something new or try something new. And so in terms of the land acknowledgement and acknowledging that we're in Mi'kma'ki, what I would ask you to do is take a minute or many minutes of time, possibly each and every day, to think about the truths that we are learning about in terms of our Indigenous history in the land that we live on, and think about our reconciliation and what our role as individuals are in that contribution to reconciliation. And it's a long road ahead for all of us, and agreeing to take some time to understand what role we can play is certainly a huge part of it. And segueing into the topic for this evening's conversation, again, I'm going to ask you to think about the information that we're going to hear from our speaker this evening and think about some calls to action in the context of the conversation this evening and what possibly you can do as a takeaway from this conversation. And we have some ideas, so we'll circle back to that once we get through the discussion this evening. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, who's calling in from a very different part of Turtle Island. So we're in Wolfville, Nova Scotia, and Dr. Ron Malcolm is joining us from Alaska, and it's 2 p.m., I believe there, ish, if I did my math correctly, and I'm not great at math. So welcome, Dr. Malcolm, and that will be the last time I call you Dr. Malcolm, because you very much are Ron to me, and I suspect you'd be fine with folks on the call calling you Ron as well. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest speaker, and then I promise I will hand it over to him to share all kinds of information, stories, and words of wisdom with us. So Dr. Ron Malcolm was born and raised in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia. He completed his BA and BEd at Acadia. He also has an MEd from Université de Moncton. He has an MA, an MS, and an education development, I think is the D, I beg your pardon on that, from several other universities. So the long list of academic credentials after your name. Following graduation from Université de Moncton, Dr. Malcolm moved to the United States and began his career teaching deaf and blind students. During his career, he has become a classroom teacher, counselor, special education coordinator, assistant principal, high school principal, and assistant director of special education. In addition, he has been an adjunct faculty member working with both undergraduate and graduate level students aspiring to become educators. His academic and research interests include deafness, blindness, dual sensory impairments, applied behavior analysis, as well as children with autism. He publishes regularly in Autism Parenting, as well as Exceptional Needs Today magazine. Dr. Malcolm is also fluent in both American Sign Language and Braille. Dr. Malcolm has received many awards, including Special Education Teacher of the Year, Employee of the Year for the state by the Governor's Committee for the Employment of the Disabled, Young Alumnus of the Year, High School Principal of the Year for his work with mental health concerns with students, Citizen of the Year, the Fox 4 Crystal Apple Award for Educator of the Year, and the Mortarboard Outstanding Education Award from the University of Kansas. For the past 3 years, he was named the top educational writer for Autism Parenting magazine. In 2021, he was named top parenting solution writer by the Exceptional Needs Today magazine. In addition to raising 3 children, Joel, Chelsea, and Andrew, with his wife, Sherry, Ron has been a foster parent to approximately 56 foster children. In his free time, he enjoys cooking, gardening, teaching Sunday school, and spending time with his family. Dr. Malcolm recently retired and has relocated to a remote fishing village in Alaska to work with children with significant disabilities. And Dr. Nat Malcolm was named the top autism safety writer for 2023 by Autism Parenting magazine for the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. So, to have a conversation with Dr. Malcolm, Ron, about autism and to be offered this opportunity to be able to ask you some questions and dig into a little bit more around what many of us will have in terms of questions around autism. It's absolutely wonderful to have you here in Autism Awareness Month. Thank you for joining us. And I did forget to say, folks, for anyone who's on the line for the first time, my name is Oonagh Proudfoot, and I'm the Executive Director of Alumni Affairs at Acadia University, and my pronouns are she, her. So, Ron, how are you this evening?
I am fine. And Oonagh, if you could kind of keep track for me of any comments or questions that pop up in the discussion area, and then just let me know, and I'll try to keep track of my time so that if people do have questions, I can respond to them.
Absolutely. Happy to do that, Ron. And for folks on the line, we encourage you to ask questions. That's why we have Ron with us this evening. We will do a bit more of a sort of focused Q&A after we hear from Ron. But by all means, as you have questions during Ron's conversation, you can type them in the chat function, or when we have that sort of focused Q&A, you by all means can bring your camera live and your microphone live and ask the questions as well. We're happy to have that. So Ron, I'm not going to really ask you a whole lot of questions. I do want to encourage you to start, though, if you wouldn't mind, with I was going to say a general explanation of what autism is. I don't think that's even remotely possible to do, but for those of us who are really coming into this conversation with not a lot of experience, and I know there are a combination of folks on the line who are listening, how would you answer that question if somebody were to say to you, what is autism?
So just to let you know up front that if you see that someone is interacting with me or asking me a question and there's like a gap between the time that they talk and I respond, it's because I'm using a captioner on my computer to understand what people are saying, unless of course you know sign language and you want to communicate directly with me, which would be wonderful, but that like never seems to happen in my life. So I just don't want people to go, what's with this gapping on here? Maybe it's an Alaskan thing. No, it's just me. You know, people, it's really curious because from the time that I was growing up in Nova Scotia and even studying at Acadia, autism itself has really evolved and changed. When I was a young teacher and starting out in my career, we knew that autism was a neurological developmental disorder, and it could affect individuals in terms of their behavioral responses, their social communication. Many of them have very restricted interests or repetitive behaviors that occur. But at that time in history, in the disabled community, autism wasn't recognized as a federal category. It was right up there along the same lines as traumatic brain injury. What they did is they lumped TBI people, people with autism, and people who they used to refer to as mentally retarded, all under the category of MR. Now, at the time in history, when MR was referred to as mental retardation, we thought that was wonderful that they were referring to those individuals that way because the prior reference was mongoloidism. So now today, if anybody in the circle of the disabled community or even the non-disabled community referred to as individual as mentally retarded, that would be insensitive, it would be rude, politically incorrect, you know, the list goes on. And we would say today, intellectually delayed. So things evolve. So I came into the field of autism during a time when they weren't sure what was going on, and they were really hyper-focused on what I would call severe elements of autism. Those children that were nonverbal, that didn't appear to have academic skills, And you would hear a lot about them like sitting on bathroom floors, spinning plates all day. Very limited. So during that time in history, because that's what everybody thought autism was, there were many individuals, including young children, that today would be called high functioning autism. I'm not crazy about those labels of high and low, but weren't even recognized. So in the general community today, I often run into many people, maybe my age, a little bit younger, but definitely not children or in school anymore. And they have no idea they have autism. They have no idea. Like nobody ever told them because nobody thought that's what you could do with autism. So with that in mind, things have really changed over the years, and you'll hear the individuals in the autism community explaining that when you meet one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. That's it. It is so different based upon each individual. I've even had multiple births in the same home, same mother, same father, identical twins. Both twins have autism. And they are radically different in how they function in life, how they socialize, how they communicate. So autism has changed from years ago to what was called a low incidence disability. It was very rare that it was occurring, to now it's a high incidence disability because so many children, I think it's up to like 1 in 40 live births now, a child is diagnosed with autism. So what that means is I have children in my program here that are gifted. They have IQs of above 128. They're scoring at the 98th percentile on math and reading tests, and they have autism. And they present with very different needs than my students who are selective mutes. There's nothing wrong with their hearing. They just choose who they communicate with. They have autism. So I can remember a situation a while back where one of my gifted students with autism was a girl. And it's much more difficult to diagnose autism in females than males. We seem to recognize it faster in males for some reason. But anyways, she had some social concerns, but nothing that was going to make her seem way out there. And she had taken every advanced math and science classes in her high school. This kid was flipping brilliant. I remember when she took an ACT test here in the United States and she scored a 36, which is a perfect score. It's very rare. And the kids around her who didn't have autism were saying, oh, she must have scored a 36 because they gave her a special test. And I happened to be there at that time when that comment was said. And I was like, yes, yeah, that's got to be it, you guys. They gave her the special autism ACT test. And I was like, there is no such thing. She took the same test you took. She just did better. That's it, man. That's it. But her parents were so concerned about her lack of social skills. And she didn't make friends easily. She had difficulty with reciprocal conversations. Like she was hyper focused on like the periodic table of elements. And so I had to sit her parents down and say, listen, maybe one day there'll be some guy that comes into her life and all he cares about is the periodic table of elements. And they will be a perfect match. And this girl who doesn't socialize well, but has the brain of a genius, will sit in the corner of some biolab, cure breast cancer for every woman in the world, and will be out doing a book tour. And I'm just hoping that she remembers who I am and she gives me a percentage of the cut that I helped when she couldn't even speak when she was in kindergarten. So one of the things we've learned is that early intervention is critical. Like a lot of families don't want to have the baby with autism. And so they'll deny it. They won't bring them in for the testing or the assessments. In fact, I get a lot more grandparents showing up for psychological testing with the children than I do mom and dad. The grandparents recognize something's different. Now, if the mom and dad, if it's not their first baby, then they're more likely to come in because they have a baby before it to compare it to, and they're going, this one's missing some developmental milestones. What's going on? But if it's their first baby, oh my God, this baby's perfect. And you're going, I need to get this kid in as soon as possible to get services started. And here in the United States, we have infant toddler services, and then they can come into the public school services at age 3. I can't really remember what Canada does, but it's probably similar. And what we find is, well, autism is never going to be cured. Well, I shouldn't say that. Maybe somebody will develop something. But over the years, the last 40 years I've worked in, like, they'll get in parents' heads and they'll have wacky ideas, like go swim with a dolphin and it'll cure your child. And so all these parents are running out, what are you doing? If your child has this diet, and parents will come in and they'll be telling me about this diet, and I'll say, it's a great diet. Your kid's going to be super healthy, but they're going to be super healthy and have autism. Well, if I spend $300 every week to have my kid with autism ride horses, hippotherapy, and I'll be like, yeah, that's great. They love horses. They interact with the animals. Well, it's all great. But at the end of the day, they're still going to have autism. And they'll go, what? And I'll say, there's no cure. But we can reduce some of the reactions that kids have, teach them some socially appropriate behaviors, show them how to deregulate or de-stress themselves and regulate their own behaviors. But what we want to do is never underestimate, because when I started out in the business, when children with autism were diagnosed, they were immediately removed to a segregated environment. Okay, great. And the kids they had horrendous behaviors. And so you'd walk into this room and there'd be like 8 of them running around, horrible behaviors, hitting people, biting people, spitting, ripping stuff up. And you'd watch them for the day and I'd go, if I took any child, even a non-disabled one, and let's say he was a biter, and I said, you can't be in the regular classroom. You bite. I'm going to put you in the you bite classroom. So we put him in the you bite classroom, and all he sees all day is other children who bite. Then by the end of the school year, he has become the best biter in the classroom, because that's all he's seen modeled all day. That's what he's been reinforced by. So if I put nonverbal children with autism in with other nonverbal children with autism, but I'm trying to teach them to listen and speak, to who, to say what? And I'll give you a great example, because sometimes I even forget, I had a little boy, autism, clearly autism. And he had lots of different interesting behaviors, and I always enjoy that. But one of the things he was very impulsive on is, at the school, they always served Jell-O every day. Jell-O and applesauce. I thought I was going to go out of my mind if I saw any more Jell-O that school year. Well, he was very fixated and attracted to green lime Jell-O, specifically. And so if anybody sat next to him in that cafeteria, there goes his finger right into their Jell-O. Now, in the case of this school, we were in an inner city school where the kids were very low poverty, and lunch may be the only meal that they eat. So if you touch their food, steal their milk, you're going to get punched in the face. It's going to be a fight because they're going to fight for their food. So we do all this training with this boy. We don't want him hurt, but yet we want him to eat in the cafeteria. We want him to learn to sit. We want him to listen to the conversations. Maybe he'll model some stuff. We've got to have this kid meet some other kids. We are practicing daily with the don't grab somebody's lime green jello. And what's he do 50 times a day? I mean, I went through so much lime green jello. We finally got to the point where we thought, oh my God, he has it down. And then we would have to practice that same skill with him outside the classroom door in the hallway. He couldn't transfer the skill. He could now only not grab the jello in the classroom. So then we're practicing it in the hallway. We're practicing it in another classroom. We're going through all this stuff. Every day was a disaster. I mean, he got better. You'd see him getting shaky with the jello being next to, but he always grabbed it. He always made the kids mad. We were trying all these therapeutic approaches. His mother was insistent that he go to public school. And when people would stop and question us all the time, why does Billy come to this school? And you'll say, like, what do you mean by that? And they'll say, like, why does Billy come to this school? And I'll say, why does any child come to this school? And you get dead silence. And you say, they come to this school because they live in this neighborhood. That's it. There's no magic on who gets to, his parents are taxpayers. Now, if they don't want him to come to school, that's on his parents. They can decide whatever they want to do with their child. But in this case, they wanted Billy to come to school with his brother and sister. Okay, so we get in there one day and oh my God, he sits next to the sweetest little girl. She's non-disabled. She's talking to him. He's not giving her the time of day. She was stuck trying to open up her milk carton. She wanted help. He wasn't caring about helping her, but he was there. He was sitting. He was trying to eat some food items. I mean, that's like a big deal for us because he was a real picky eater. And she's just like really believing this kid is like her friend or something. I'm not even sure he knows she's there. All of a sudden, she tears the top off the lime green jello. And I'm just watching and I'm thinking, this poor, poor little girl. And his hand goes right in the jello. This quiet little girl just reams him out. She becomes this animal. She's screaming at him that he touched her jello and she thought he was her friend. And why would you? And he stopped. I spent 3 months of my life taking a child's hand out of mushed up green lime jello, buying it, cooking it, mixing it, putting it in molds, practicing how many times a day. And it took a 7-year-old little girl who was sweet and shy yelling at him, and he stopped. Now, I don't know why he stopped. But to this day, he only touches his own lime green jello. So never underestimate the value or the power of non-disabled peers, because for some reason that meant something to him. And he had never indicated that to me in any other social situation. And it wasn't like he was bonded with her, but something clicked and he put that puzzle together and I went, oh my God. So even from very young all the way up to, grade 12 students, we have learned that through data gathering that 60% of individuals with autism 2 years out of high school are still not employed. And that's autism that we would go isn't even recognizable. And so we look at several things that we're wanting to, like, what's their employment situation like? Have they had a part-time job? What's their independent living skills like? Are they actively seeking any social relationships? And did they want to be more vocationally trained, or did they want to be more like post-secondary university trained? So one of the first things that we work with all of our children with disabilities, not just autism, is how they're going to handle the ridiculous questions that they're going to be asked out in society. Now, with my other population, my wheelchair students, my blind students, my deaf students, my cerebral palsy students, they're easily recognized in the community and they get hit more with ridiculous questions. My students with autism look like everybody else. So until you go to interact with them or you get a response back from them, you may not realize that this is a person on the spectrum. But many of my students with autism are also very black and white in their language approaches. Like if I said to one of my students, you know, I didn't like that comment of your sharp tongue coming at me, they would say, I didn't cut you. And I'd say, oh. Or if I said to them, you look sad today, that would like confuse them. Like, I didn't say I was sad. Why are you assuming I'm sad? Like, it's very black and white to them. In fact, one of my girls in 8th or 9th grade, I can't remember, it was during 9/11. She hadn't been diagnosed with autism. And she had come to me during that time in history and she said, I don't understand why I don't care about what's going on right now. And I said, sit down, Sally, tell me a little bit more about what you're thinking. And as I interacted with her, it wasn't impacting her at all. And 3 months later, we find out Sally has autism. But she was a verbal kid that recognized, because she was in a public school setting, how upset everybody around her was, and she wasn't getting it. She wasn't not getting it, but she wasn't feeling it like everybody else. So one of the things that we work with, aside from coming up with appropriate responses for dealing with ridiculous questions about disabilities, is should you disclose your disability to others? And the research and the disabled community are split on it. Because in one token, you want the kids to feel a sense of pride for who and what they are. But in another token, like a lot of people, even with autism, will say, I don't want the job because I have autism. I want the job because I have the skills and the training that can benefit your company. And I just happen to, on the side, have autism. So years ago, they used to be very blunt with us when we would, as disabled people, go in to apply for jobs, and they just tell you to your face they're not hiring you because you can't hear, you can't see, you can't walk, you know, whatever. Or they would put those ridiculous job requirements in the job description. Have to be able to drive a car. Have to be able to work in noisy environments. Have to be able to speak clearly on the phone. I'm like, who's coming up with these? So disabled people are more likely right now to maybe try to not disclose so much, because one of the language concerns that comes up with my older students with autism is when they do want to disclose, they just spill their guts. They're telling you every medication they're on, if they have a mental health concern, whether their father drinks at night at home, you know, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, we don't need to tell everybody all the personal business if your family's home. So, but it takes them practicing those skills for them to improve. Simply telling them to stop it, knock it off, no, can't do that. Then I would write my How to Tell an Autism Child No book, and I would be touring the country instead of up here with penguins and walruses, you know, trying to make a living. But so I kind of chuckle on that. So I really have to sit down and say to the kids, it's really your decision. Because even students with autism will say, Dr. Malcolm, what do you think I should do? That's a great question. What do you think you should do? And they'll say, no, tell me, tell me. But the problem is, even if you're a disabled adult and you're heavily involved in children's lives who have disabilities, children nowadays with disabilities are intensely attracted to us if we're in their environment. And that's because, like, when I was growing up, I never saw anybody in public school with a disability. Like, no one. There weren't teachers, custodians, cafeteria, nobody was disabled. I mean, the world was segregated. Deaf people went to a deaf school, blind people went to a blind. They even had schools for orthopedic people. If you were in a wheelchair, you went to the ortho school and you're like, wow, no wonder these people are angry nowadays. But when they see who and what we are, they become very attached and they want to please us. So for example, let's say I don't like smoking. I don't care if you smoke. Don't write me letters talking to me about smoking. My mother smokes. My father smokes. My 5 brothers smoke. My 2 sisters smoke. I don't smoke. I just don't smoke. But it doesn't bother me. I don't care. But let's say I don't like smoking and all the kids with autism asked me my opinion during a Cancer Awareness Week on smoking. And I made the comment, I don't like smoking. By lunchtime that day, every kid with autism that I work with doesn't like smoking. And if you ask them why, Dr. Malcolm said. And I'm like, no, you need to think for yourself. Because what if I said, I don't like people? White people get on my nerves, man. They shouldn't be allowed. They should go back to the country where they came from. Scotland. It would be mean to white people because they want to please me. So finding role models is great, but the role model has to still push them to be independent with their own thinking. So what I find a lot of times with the children with autism, it's their behavior that bothers everybody. People don't take them out shopping. They don't take them to movies, sporting events, church, because they have what people call meltdowns. And I'll say, well, yeah, that's true. But if your family is going and the child is part of your family, he should go. Well, he's going to act out. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, we don't like that. Well, yeah, okay. I'm sure the people watching it don't like it either. But he's never going to learn to control that if you keep him at home isolated. So all behavior is communication. When your child is doing that, they're trying to tell you something that they can't say. Now, if they're verbal, it's a little bit easier, but even highly verbal children with autism will get stuck sometimes and they just can't get it out. Nonverbal kids will act out, obviously, because that's how they communicate. So they want something. They're trying to tell you something. So a lot of times we do some interventions with them with what we call replacement behaviors. So I had a little guy the other day and his thing was he was always punching the teachers. Punch, punch, punch. And the teachers were pretty good about it, but you know, teachers don't want to get punched. It's not what they signed up for. And so as I observed him in the classroom, I figured out that the function of his behavior was to get the teacher's attention. Because every time he punched her, she responded to him. And I was like, oh my God. And her first response was, what? You want him to hit me and then I just don't say anything? And I'm like, aren't you a ray of sunshine? Yes. So what we're going to do is I'm going to teach Billy. He's going to have 2 cards on his desk, about the size of a driver's license, credit card, and I'm going to laminate them. Because the first time I gave them to Billy, Billy ripped them up. The second time, Billy was using them so much that they were crinkled and falling apart. The third time I laminated them, this is right up with lime green Jello again. It's going to be my book, I tell you, man. And he liked the laminating, but then he didn't like the color that I used for the 2 cards. So I was like, what color do you want? He wanted orange, so I got orange. Then he didn't want anything written on the card, because then people would make fun of him thinking he was a baby. And I was like, oh my God, I can't make this stuff up. So he ended up with an orange and a green card. When the teachers saw the orange card, they'd all been trained. That's Billy's way of communicating. He needs a break. Something's triggering him. He's going to go off, man. And he has now recognized himself, which is flipping fantastic for him. Give him the break. Don't ask him a bunch of questions. Just give him the break. With the other card, they all started to learn that he was also having a function of his behavior that we noticed that his meltdowns were always occurring at 9:15 when we tracked the data. That was during math class. He hates math. He would prefer to be down sitting in the principal's office because there was always a long line of kids, and he would miss math class. But then he was getting further and further behind because he wasn't getting instruction. So the other card was a replacement behavior. Instead of punching, I need help. And over would come the teacher. And then he could explain what was going on, took care of it. No meltdown. No meltdown. There was another student that I have that was being very inappropriate, a male student with autism, and he was grabbing his teacher sexually. So when I come and I observe in the classroom, and of course, up goes his hand and she approaches him, you know, whatever, and he grabs right onto her breast and she's like looking at me like, see? And I'm like, oh my God. And so after the class was over, we changed the behavior by changing the environment in the classroom. Because I said to her, how many times has he done that to you? And she's like, daily. She was so offended. And I was like, okay. So I couldn't help but notice that when his hand goes up, you approach his desk. And she goes, yes, I do that for all the kids in the classroom. And I was like, great. I need you to put a table between you and Billy. What? That way he can't reach and grab you. And she's like, well, that's not going to work. And I was like, well, we don't know that it's not going to work because you haven't tried it yet. So try it. And then if it doesn't work, I'll come back with some other brilliant idea, or I'll bring you some Jell-O. She didn't understand the humor in that. But anyways, sure enough, she sets up a table. And he was on one end, she was on the other. She answered the question. He didn't touch her. So we blocked or prevented the behavior from occurring, and away it went. And he stopped it. He stopped it. So the other thing I would say to parents or grandparents, if you're in here today, is if you're thinking that your child is going to like live independently or maybe need supportive housing or whatever, you need to get your kids signed up when they're in kindergarten. Because people will come to me during we say junior and senior year here in the United States, and you guys say grade 11 and 12. And I'll be like, you're signing this kid up in grade 11? They'll be on this list for 15 years. I'm lucky if I get them signed up in kindergarten or first grade if they're only still living at home for a year or two after high school. So the quicker you can get their names on those lists out in the community, the more of a likelihood that they'll have some independent living skills that are going to take place with them. The other thing today that I'm finding with even what is considered in the autism community is low functioning. I don't like that term, but anyways, even my quote, low functioning kids have great technology skills. Like when they're having a behavioral issue, and I ask a teacher or mom and dad, like, what's a preferred item that seems to calm them down? Like some parents will say, give them a weighted blanket. Okay, we'll try the weighted blanket. Oh, that worked. Great. Okay, we'll put one of those blankets in the classroom. But I would say probably 80% of my parents are saying an iPad. Now I'm looking at a kid that doesn't say one word. And you're going, iPad. Okay, iPad. And I'll go over and I'll watch this kid playing some game on the iPad. And I'll say to him, come here. And he'll come over. And I'll mess up his screen. And I'll give it back to him. Well, he's mad at me for one. I'm probably going to get punched, but I would deserve that. But anyway, aside from that story, he all of a sudden starts pressing buttons and hitting it. And up comes the game. And I'm going, this kid's supposed to have an IQ of less than 40? There's no way. There's no way. And so today we're even seeing, in a time of history, people graduating with bachelor's degrees that are 100% autistic, 100% nonverbal. They don't say a word. And years ago, they would have been in an institution. And I'm looking at them going, they're typing away. I've got a couple of them that are using eye blinkers. They don't even have the use of their hands. And you're going, holy moly. They're writing English papers for English comp during their BA degree. And you're just going, so things have really changed. What I want to stress is not everything that happens in a person's life who has autism is because of their autism. So we were at a school the other day, and the pizza that they served to the kids had onions on it. And one of my boys with autism, he just hates onions. He hates onions, but he likes pizza. And so I went, oh my God, who could have predicted this happening? We don't have a bagged lunch for him. He's a very picky eater. What am I going to do? So the word spreads through the school that people with autism don't eat onions. And I'm going, what? But what was odd with him is the one thing I could find was French fries. Because there were two other kids, they didn't have autism, but they didn't like onions either. So they're all in my office. I'm like, when am I going to feed these kids? So I find this burger joint with French fries, and the two without autism were thrilled. He's not so thrilled because all he eats every day is pizza, a bag of yogurt covered raisins and nacho chips, and his mother packs it, but she didn't pack it because the school was serving pizza. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking at him like, how am I going to get him to eat? His mother works. She's a single mom. She can't leave. There was nothing at the store for him. And so I slapped down a French fry next to him. And this is what we do. And we sit and we sit. I'm starving. I got to take some insulin. I'm diabetic. So I pick up some French fries, shove them in my mouth, jack my insulin in, and I'm looking at them. The other two kids are eating, they're doing their thing, and he's looking and he's rocking a little bit. He's a little catatonic. And all of a sudden, the flipping French fry goes in his mouth. And I went, he ate a French fry. He ate a French fry. I give him another French fry. So at the end of the day, when his mother pulls up to get him, I'm like running out there like I'm having a seizure myself. He ate French fries. And she's like, Dr. Malcolm, no, he didn't. He never really. Oh my God. When he got in a situation where he had no choice, he didn't melt down. He ate the French fries. But still, the school believes that all children with autism don't like onions. And you're going, okay, you take your victories where you can get them, parents, and you got to go on. But there's lots of things go on in the life of a child with autism that it's because they're 13. It has nothing to do. Or they screw up some dating situation with some girl at the school because they asked her out wrong. And parents are having a conniption on their poor child with, autism. And I'll say, there's 6 other boys in that class that don't have autism, and they've all screwed it up too. That one kid, that one girl I was telling you about that was so high in science and math, she maxed out of every one of those classes at the high school. And during her grade 12 year, I was like, what are we going to do? I mean, she has nothing left to take, and da-da-da-da. And the parents, and she was gifted, huge IQ, huge. And her parents wanted her to go take, I don't know, astrophysics or something. And the kid comes to her own IEP meeting. And I'm a strong advocate for children with autism attending their own IEP meetings, because you shouldn't be out in the hallway or sitting in a classroom while 18 people are talking about your life and what's in your best interests. You need to have a say in something, because you can say no, you don't want to do something, or yes, I want to do that, and yada, yada, yada. But anyways, I mean, I think her grade point average is 4.6 or something. She's taken so many of these high-level classes, advanced, but she wants to make cupcakes. And when I tell you, I've never seen parents' jaws hit a table so quickly. Cupcakes. And they think she's insane. They think it's her autism. And I go, cupcakes. And they're like, Dr. Malcolm, what do you think about that? Well, what I think about it is, with her background in chemistry and physics, I swear to God, she'll sit again in some lab and she'll be the next Duncan Hines, and we'll all be laughing because we thought we lowered expectations. So we ended up bartering with her and saying, if your mom and dad let you go to school a half day for culinary, would you go to the college in the afternoon and take some physics and chemistry? And she went, yes. So we offered her choices. Rather than say no, or have her melt down and someone says, calm down. And by the way, I've never met an individual in my life, autistic or not, that calmed down because you asked them to calm down. They usually wig out more. So when people with autism do it, I go, okay, well, that's about as normal as it gets. And when kids with autism complain about some of the treatment that they run into in public schools, and some of it can be brutal, don't get me wrong, I have to sit them down and say, you know, you want it to be part of the mainstream. And part of the mainstream is ugly. But it's ugly for kids with acne. It's ugly for kids who are poor and don't have nice clothes. It's ugly for kids who have weight problems. And it's ugly for people with disabilities. So when you tell me something, it doesn't mean I'm going to rally a flag just because you've been treated mean, because that's going to happen on a job. And we need to figure out how you're going to survive, because you can't just quit because people are mean to you. Because it's like, I find there's less mean, I guess is how I'd phrase it, or people that are better within the last 15 years at how they cover their mean. It used to be brutal to us. They just tell us to our faces that they weren't hiring us and tell us it was because of our bodies or how things didn't work. And there wasn't a thing we could do about it. Now everyone's worried about getting sued. So they kind of lie to you and then they just never call you for the job. But or they hire a person with a lesser disability, and you can't sue someone for hiring a disabled person over you and you're disabled. So we work with the kids on how to reduce their frustration and their anxiety, how you can tell the difference between something that they're interested in as opposed to a career choice, reminding kids that if you're going to go to university, take a copy of your IEP with you that shows you've already been diagnosed, because I've had 2 kids this year that didn't have their IEPs with them at the beginning of their university freshman year. One was a girl who was profoundly deaf and had to spend $1,200 to prove she's still deaf at age 18. And the other one was an 18-year-old boy who was blind, and we're sending him off for $1,500 to prove he's still blind. And the kids are looking at me and going, if you had kept that copy of that IEP, it's a legal document. So with kids with disabilities, even autism, who can handle going off to a university campus, there are things we want to prep them on. The other one that I find that's very concerning, kids going off to university with autism, is if they're taking any medications for any reason. Because most of my students who are older and autism are very responsible with their medication, almost too much so. They're very regimented. It's down to the minute that they take it. But what happens in everybody's push to make these kids social, these kids go out and party, and they've never mixed alcohol with their medication, and they have a reaction. I had an autistic student show up drunk in one of my classes. And I was like, what is wrong with him? He never laughs this much. And he was all over the place. And after class, I drag him over and I'm like, oh my God, you're lit. And he was drunk from Saturday night. My class was Monday. But he didn't know. And he was trying to make friends. It's like when they get a job, the number one thing that I find that most of them get in trouble for on their jobs isn't their social skills. It's not their behavior. It's not showing up on time. They usually show up early. They're always willing to work. They're never sick. I mean, they come in sick. They don't know how to handle their 15-minute break. They don't know what to do. They want to keep working. And of course, union agreements say, nope, you got to take your lunch, you got to take your break. And then somebody with all their infinite wisdom, usually their mother, sorry, moms, says to them when they come home and they mention something like that, they'll say, oh, well, just do what everybody else is doing, fit in. And then they pull up one day to pick up their baby from Walmart or whatever, and their baby's out front smoking. Because the people they were working with were smoking. So they just copied their behavior. So I kind of chuckle on that. But anyways, that's a little bit of a brief. But do you have any questions that are popping up from anybody that maybe I can answer?
Well, talk about timing, Ron. So just as you asked that, we have a comment in the chat function that I will read for it,
Okay.
read for you rather. And folks, listen, if you want to pop some questions in there, if you want to come on with your cameras, by all means, please do. So Randy says, I'm a grandmother to identical twin 4-year-old girls with autism. It's been a difficult few years for our family. Thank you so much for this conversation. It leaves me hopeful that we can make it through this. Dr. Malcolm's approach is so uplifting. Did I hear in the introduction that he has written books? Can you recommend the best place to find helpful resources?
Right now, I write every month for Autism Parenting Magazine, and I think the fee for that is like super cheap for parents, like a couple bucks or something. But I mean, I had parents that write in every month and ask me questions, and then I answer them. And it's just amazing the stuff that people are struggling with. You know, maybe they live in a rural area, or maybe they're like this grandmother, like she's raising her grandchildren. She not only gets one with autism, she gets two, and they're girls. I mean, talk about your rarity, right? And so, you know, everything from what can you expect from public school? What can you expect from the community? One of the things that I find that works really well with girls with autism is if they're into plants or animals, letting them take care of something else so they develop some kind of empathy. Are they into gardening? Will they keep a plant alive? Do they like puppies or kitties? Do they want a goldfish? Making them personally responsible. But no, Grandma, my book won't come out for a while, but I guarantee you, if you send me a note, I'll give you a free copy of it when it does come out. Maybe when I finish teaching up here in the Arctic, I'll find time to write a book. But for
Well,
now,
listen, Ron, first of all, I do hope that your book is called Lime Green Jello. Okay,
no kidding. That's a
I
great
hope that that's the name
title.
of your book. And Randy, I'm just gonna tack on a little bit to Ron's answer. I've read several of Ron's articles in the Autism Parenting magazine, and I would highly recommend a subscription. I believe you can get an online subscription, Ron, because I did some digging. Yeah. Um, and I'm going to share a story that I remember in one of my many conversations with Ron. Is what you do, if and certainly correct me if I'm wrong, is Ron will have an exam or an experience with a child with a disability, specifically a child with autism, for example. And as he works through that scenario, he will then write about it and share it with others. And one that I remember you specifically telling me about was a young girl who was starting her period, and she had no clue what was happening to her. And so you're like, okay, so I'm dealing with a young woman now who has autism and she has no freaking clue what's going on. So
And they
he
sent her
worked,
to me. Me.
well, I can see why.
And I'm sitting there going, okay, I'm going to need permission from the parent to have this conversation. That mother couldn't sign that permission form quick enough for me to do it. And I was like, oh, I thought you'd rather have a female. But the kid was so bonded with me. And I'm like, okay, well, I can't use personal examples here, but let's go. And then after she was gone, I'm like, oh, I'm writing an article.
Absolutely. So Randy, please check it out because she says I will get that subscription immediately. Good idea. So we have a hand raised in the audience, and I'm hoping that means that this person's going to come on camera and ask their question. Over to you, Melanie.
You know that I am a mom to a little guy, 13-year-old with autism, and I always learn so much from listening to you. So thank you for sharing your information and your experiences. As an educational institution, Acadia being an educational institution, and as someone who has a Bachelor of Education, I do, you do. What is one thing you wish that universities were teaching future teachers at this time about dealing with people with it can either be specifically with autism or people with special needs in general? And the reason I ask this is I graduated 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, from a Bachelor of Education program at a time when the emphasis was all on people first language. So, and that's what my takeaway was that I didn't learn anything really about dealing with people with special needs, but I learned a lot about making sure that I said my son with autism instead of my autistic son, for instance. And that was the focus then. And I'm just wondering what you wish people were teaching teachers now.
That is such an interesting point, because I was raised with that people first language thing too. And until I started writing for the United Kingdom, and they would send my transcript back for a final draft, and I would see them write autistic children. And I'd go, what? And I was like, oh, we don't say that. That's offensive. The leaders in the disability first movement came from the deaf and the blind community. They will say, I am a deaf person, I'm a blind person, because they associate their being with who and what they are. And so the autistic community has picked it up and are now saying autistic children. And it's a sense of pride and for who you belong to. I think that when I was going through, and let's just lay this out there, Melanie, we didn't graduate 20 years ago. We're talking more like 30. Okay, so now that we've let that little myth go, what I would say is they always would say to us, oh, you took Introduction to Exceptional Children. And I can remember walking into that class the first day, and I was confused by the title. I didn't know if it meant special education or if it meant gifted children. Like, I didn't know what this class was about. So they thought that they made big gains with regular education teachers on giving them one class, 3 or 4 credits on kids with disabilities, because they really didn't anticipate during that time in history that those kids with disabilities would come through the floodgate into the public school. And you went, oh, well, now they're there. So I would prefer that rather than have someone write a research paper on autism, because anybody can do that, I would rather they get placed in a classroom for a day or two, knowing that there's some children in there with autism, see if they can pick them out, how they could help a teacher, what a teacher could give them for feedback, so that they're not meeting these children with disabilities for the first time. And they meet a variety of, so the more that, or bringing adults in, because you should meet the adults today in our community. If you guys remember back in the day when we sat in aisles and they would open up our reader and they would start with the kid at the front of the row and you read the first paragraph, second, third, fourth. Well, I'd be like the fourth in line. So I'd always count, okay, I'm number 4, so I don't have to pay any attention till it's my turn. Well, the third flippin' kid can't read. And he's spitting and sputtering, and I'd rather pull my own eyeballs out than have him read this paragraph. But I'm prepared for the fourth, but he screwed it up. We never knew that that kid was dyslexic because it wasn't a term. We just knew they were a crappy reader and they drove us nuts. So everything from hyper kids are now ADHD. Kids who we thought were cognitively slower, autism. And you're just going, oh my God. So the terms are changing. I just think that the more impact they have, and not just special education teachers, regular ed, these kids are coming. It doesn't matter how low you think they are. I have a little guy with autism and Down syndrome right now in a 10th grade geometry class. And people are looking at me like, what? And I'm like, listen, on his IEP, it says he will cut out a circle, a square, a triangle, and identify it. He can do that in there with his peers. And people would be like, it's not fair to the other kids. The other kids don't care. They don't care. They are so encompassing of these kids today. It's the adults that are freaking out. And you're like, what are you freaking out? Well, I don't think it's fair. He gets an A. Why? He did A work for what he can do. Plus, he's seeing modeling all day. So now he's asking me things about after-school basketball games. And I'm like, you don't even like basketball. But the boys are going, oh. So now I'm having to say to the mom, drop him off. He'll go in. She's freaking out. I'm just going to let him out of the car and walk into the image. Yes, you are. Drive your car, block down the street, have your nervous breakdown. He'll be fine because we'll keep an eye on him without smothering him and make sure he's safe. But there are good people out there also. We just need more of them to understand why kids, and don't limit everybody with a disability. I have kids with disabilities in public classrooms that are getting no accommodations and are pulling A's, and they're miles ahead of everybody else. They're just disabled. That doesn't mean everybody with a disability is dumb. You know, D is for disability. D.
At 8 o'clock, like already at 8 o'clock. And I'm not surprised that the hour flew by because, well, and Christine writes in the chat function, Ron, she says, you're a brilliant storyteller. And you absolutely are. Your attitude is infectious. And I hope that everyone who listened to you tonight, and I know everyone who meets you walks away with a little bit more Ron in their world. And I think that that's a beautiful thing.
Hey,
I
Oonagh,
thank
I wanted to
you.
just jump in and say,
Sure.
I think there's an organization at Acadia University called Smile. And so if anyone is in the audience and you're looking for a great organization that does fantastic work, especially early intervention with children with disabilities on campus, almost like what Melanie said, like I wish every teacher was required to volunteer at Smile and meet those kids. But like any organization, you can't do X, Y, and Z without funding. So if you're looking for something local to donate to, that would be great.
So Ron, you took the words right out of my mouth, number one. Number two, Melanie already has a link to the Smile program in the chat function. So between the two of you, my work is done here. But I'm so glad you mentioned Smile, Ron, because that's exactly where I was going to go with this. I wanted to share a feel-good story with you that we just had our alumni dinner and we had a Smile fundraiser, which did quite well at the dinner. And one of the award recipients was a Smile leader. And so we heard from him some examples and some storytelling like you've just shared with us as well. So when I talked at the beginning of the hour about takeaways and about call to actions, I love that you mentioned Smile, because for those people who are close and or have Smile near and dear to their hearts because they were volunteers themselves, or that because they know community members who are benefiting from the program, it's a great place to go and drop a dime or two if you can, for sure. And love your recommendation. In fact, we might just kind of go back to the School of Ed, Melanie, to sort of further answer your question about what you asked Ron, what could be happening for teachers that are learning to be teachers today. That's a great suggestion, is that they spend some time with the Smile program. I love the examples that you gave. I love the example of when you talked about the biter and you put them in a biter classroom. I mean, go figure that that's what's going to happen. So you really, I'm going to say this, Ron, and I hope you take it. You really dumbed it down for us. So thank you for that. It really, I mean, as you were speaking, I'm sitting here going, well, duh. I mean, obviously. So thank you for speaking to us on my level and helping me understand. Folks, we didn't have a lot of time for questions, but if you have them, please send them my way and we'll do our very best to get you answers for them. We have a virtual event this time, or in about 4 weeks' time, for May, which is Disability Awareness Month. So we'll be hearing from an alum, Matt Corkum, who is an advocate. Yeah, and so we've got another one next month, another virtual event to hear once more from an alum who's doing some terrific work out there. I have some additional good news for you, Randy. Not only did we tell you about Autism Parenting Magazine, you're also the name that was drawn for our giveaway this evening. So we will be, I know, isn't that fun? So we will send something along to Randy as a thanks for joining us this evening. Our virtual event library will have this recording on it very soon. And Ron will be sending you a thank you as well for the time that you shared with us this evening. Really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody for joining us, and have an absolutely wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you, you guys.